everyone.
Hi, and welcome to our wind energy webinar. I'm Nicolette Pombo-Fansel, editor of ESI Africa, and your moderator for today's discussion. Hosted in collaboration with Windarbor, taking place on the 8th and 9th of October at the CTICC in Cape Town. The theme of this year's Windarbor is Unleashing Renewables for Economic Development. We know that in 2018, the global installed wind capacity reached 597 gigawatts. The exciting news is that between now and 2023, the African market is anticipated to add 6 gigawatts. Joining me on air are three professionals who are ready to provide insight on this and to answer your questions. Before I introduce them, please take note that the webinar, recording, and PowerPoint presentations will be available for you to access from our website on www.esi-africa.com. To ask our guests a question, use your Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. And welcome to our guest speakers. They are Peter Venn from WindLab Africa, Jonathan Visser from Integrated Wind Power, and Andrea Isidori from the Danish Energy Agency in Denmark. To find out more about them and Windarbor, please toggle through the tabs on the top of your screen. So to start off our discussion, I'm now going to ask each of our guest speakers to provide us with a brief opening statement. I'd like to ask Peter to please begin with your opening statement.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. I think what is important to understand is that wind energy across the world and in the continent in particular can play a huge role from a developmental point of view, not only from delivering cheap electricity in South Africa. I think we can comfortably say that wind energy will be in the price range of 60 Rand cents compared to what the city of Cape Town buys from Eskom at about 1 Rand 10. But also the ability to have rural industrialization. And I think engaging with any government across the continent, rural industrification is really what they want. My slide up on the screen is just around the process of wind energy, and I think we've got to accept that developing a wind energy project on the continent is going to cost anywhere from $2 to $5 million. And it's going to take, in South Africa, you cannot get an erected project from the conceptual stage. You cannot get it done in under 5 or 6 years. So we are talking incredibly long time frames, not as long as the coal builds in South Africa, but we all are talking those incredibly long time frames, and that's important to understand. You know, if we look at the risk profile with regards to what we call development, those 5 to 7 years before financial close, it's really about understanding the risks, and these risks include all the aspects such as grid risk and environmental risk, off-take risk, political risk, before you commit that last $2 to $3 million until you have that real forward push. If we look at the technology, we're seeing bigger and bigger onshore turbines. We will get to a point where we have 10 megawatt turbines in the next 3 to 4 years. And that's really going to assist us in maintaining this downward curve with regards to the price of renewable energy, in particular wind energy in this discussion. You know, if we look at the African situation, we have huge challenges with regards to electrification, and wind energy, along with solar PV and the renewables in general, can really bring huge benefit to the continent. Having utility scale energy is critical for economic growth, and wind and solar on this continent can provide that. If we look at countries like Morocco and Denmark, they're exporting a lot of electricity, thus creating foreign income to be used for other developmental needs. And really, as a last point, and this is an important point, you cannot get a better industry, solar PV, wind, in the renewable energy sector for rural communities and the growth and the expansion of that. And wind energy in particular is extremely land friendly. The turbines are widely spaced apart. You can continue to do your farming activities, and the infrastructure really gets upgraded. People don't realize that to construct a wind farm, one needs a rather large dam for all the concrete that is required. And that dam at the end of the day is left behind and can assist with growing the economic development of the areas. So I think I'm going to wrap up on that point, and I'll continue now.
Thank you so much, Peter. As you've said, economic growth is something that we can look forward to with wind energy development. Jonathan, I'd like to ask you to please give your opening statement.
Thank you, Nicolette, and thank you, Peter. Definitely, it's quite exciting seeing the growth of renewable energy on the continent, and to see wind energy kind of providing both a cost-effective electricity source as well as huge social benefits. And what I thought I'd open up with in today's discussion is just a quick case study on some of those social economic developments that we're seeing, and how political and authorities play, and what role they play in ultimately creating that value for wind energy on the ground. So the case study I've just actually dug up is an operating wind farm, which is called West Coast 1 Wind Farm, which is located on the west coast of South Africa. And this particular wind farm, while I didn't work on it myself, I've been involved in the area and seen it quite closely in what they're doing in the community. And this wind farm, just to give you some background, it was around 2 projects in the Department of Energy's REI 4P program, which is the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. And they managed to be successful in that round 2 bidding process, and eventually reached commercial operation in 2015, and have been running their wind farm since then. The wind farm was developed by a company called Royal Wind Power, which is ultimately owned by the French company recently named ENGIE. So during the development of this wind farm, what is interesting is they considered a large piece of area, and like Peter was saying, the impact on the ground is quite small because you're dealing with these wind turbines and their footprint is very small. And the particular developers at the time were looking at a wind farm which expanded over a large amount of area and had 2 groups of turbines. And all the turbines that they currently ended up building were 47 2-megawatt Vestas turbines, reaching a total capacity of 94 megawatts. Now, in the early stages of that project, if you'll know, the Department of Energy in South Africa, we run a procurement program which ultimately procures 140 megawatt wind farms. And to be competitive in that process, you want to be reaching that 140 megawatts. Now, this particular project had all these turbines planned, and what happened was they had to exclude a certain bunch of turbines, 8 turbine positions which they were considering, because a heritage authority in the area considered the sensitivity of these turbines to a nearby significant archaeology sites quite important. So they said that they actually opposed those wind turbines. So ultimately they were left out of the final project. But what that meant was the wind farm ended up being less competitive in the process and lost the socio-economic development contributions which they can make. And if you know in the Department of Energy's program, we have one of 6 economic development contribution figures, which is socio-economic development contributions, which means that a percentage of the revenue of a wind farm ultimately goes to socio-economic development. And they set a threshold as a minimum for these projects. 1% of the revenue of the wind farm needs to go to the social activities in the area, and they set a target of about 1.5. Now, in this next slide, you can see that during the operation of this 94 megawatt project, they've been adding a lot to the community through early childhood development, so cognitive development of children between the ages of 0 and 6 years of age, as well as high school development of social programs and supporting young ladies and girls with support in high school. So there is a lot of work that West Coast One is doing. And West Coast One is this wind farm, and they are doing in the area where the municipality actually recognized what they were doing and gave some awards as the highest benefit providing social programs in the area. So what was lost in those 8 turbines, we could kind of calculate, and we could say that, if you do the numbers of around 2 projects, about 650,000 rands worth of social contributions was lost, which isn't a lot, but over the lifetime of a 20-year project, you can look at about 13, 14 million rand as a conservative figure that was lost to that community. So I think just with wind farm developments in the future, I think authorities and local government need to realize that energy and wind energy isn't necessarily just the energy it's providing, but all these social benefits, which in this case is social economic contributions, but then again also job creation, local procurement of services and goods. So it goes a lot bigger, and I think it'll just be good to see that authorities start realizing what the decisions mean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I know that there's been quite a few wind farm developments in South Africa that have been quite inventive around their social activities, and it's very good to see. I'd like to now ask Andrea to give his opening statement. Andrea, please present your slides.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Nicholas. And I'd like to focus my presentation and my opening today probably speaking about the value and the role of wind energy in power systems. And I think that I'd like to start saying that, as it was shown, wind energy is becoming one of the cheapest energy source in the world. I mean, different renewable energy auction results from Mexico, Morocco, and also the learning curve in South Africa clearly show that it is a cheap energy source. And at the same time, I believe that wind energy can represent what we can call the backbone of our present and the future of the electricity systems. And I would like maybe to use the example of Denmark on this matter to give you an explanation about what is the value of wind energy in Denmark. And I want to give you maybe some numbers on this because I think they are pretty impressive. I mean, in Denmark, more than 33% of the electricity production comes from wind, and the wind energy curtailment is almost close to zero, which means that we are able to use all the wind energy produced by the wind farms. 43% means that this is a sort of annual average value. We are able to integrate in the net in a matter of seconds and minutes more than 100% of wind. And I think what is also astonishing, considering this high penetration of variable renewable energy, is that Denmark has the highest security of supply in the entire Europe. with less than 22 minutes of power outages per year. If we consider, a system like US or South Africa or other economies that are dominated by coal-fired thermal power plants, that is quite impressive. And also what I'd like to show is how the future is going to look like in Denmark. We have a political commitment of achieving 100% electricity production from renewable energy by 2030. And by 2050, the government of Denmark commits to be 100% independent from fossil fuels, which means that all the electricity production, all the transportation sector and civic sector will be covered by green energy. And I think what maybe is also relevant to share with you, because this is actually what I do in my job, is to actually share the experience of Denmark worldwide, including in South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt, is actually how to share, how to be able to integrate such a large percentage of wind. And more or less what I can say is that there are 4 efficient means of large-scale wind integration. The first one is to enhance the interconnectivity with countries and with the neighboring countries, because as also highlighted before by Peter, it's also a source of generating more income for countries. The other feature that is extremely important is to realize a cross-border electricity market. And in South Africa, for instance, we have the South African power pool that will be definitely used in a more dynamic way in order to enable this. And this is the same for the Eastern African power pool. I mean, there are means in Africa that can let a more interactive and dynamic way of trading energy. Then the third point, of course, is more flexibility in the generation system, which means to actually use thermal power plants as provider of flexibility. So instead of considering thermal power plants as providers of base load, we should start to see them as being able to actually integrate the fluctuation of renewable energy and create incentive in order to stimulate thermal power plants operator to operate the power fleet in a more flexible way. And then the last point is, of course, to try to develop more specialized forecasting and operational planning tools, which means for transmission system operators to be able to adapt their practice based on the fact that renewable energy will have a major role in their operation system. And I think I will stop here in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that in terms of the cross-border electricity market, this is where our regional power pools can play a very key role. To our listeners, we have prepared a very quick one-question survey for you, and I would ask you now to please answer yes or no to whether the not in my backyard opposition should be a concern for wind development. Also, I just want to remind you that if you have a question for our 3 speakers, you're welcome to type your questions into your Q&A box on the left-hand side of your screen. Right, so we have already received a number of questions, and I'd like to start the discussion around these questions. And starting off with you, Peter, there's been many entrepreneurs who are asking how to enter the wind energy space. So do you think that would knowing the key takeaways from South Africa's procurement program be a guide? And what is the road ahead to now increase wind capacity on the grid?
Thank you. I could probably spend an hour on this, but I'll summarize up in 2 minutes. I mean, yes, absolutely. I would advise anybody that is passionate about this space to get involved. As I always talk about in many aspects of my business, is we create businesses. These aren't in farms. I actually detest the term, I must be honest. We create businesses. A typical power purchase agreement over a 20 years is $1 billion. And so you're creating $1 billion business in doing this. So please get involved. Any aspect of business can be related to wind farms, so don't be shy. I think what have we learned from the REAP? Reverse auctions work for, as a citizen of South Africa and of the continent and of the world, we need to drive all energy procurement in a reverse auction manner. We get the cheapest electricity, and what that really means is we're using the best resources that are possible. We're paying the least for the electricity, and that rent-seeking opportunity of typical monopoly players in industry, that money can go into the economy. I think the other thing in a world of state capture in South Africa, reverse auctions lead to a place where there can be little to no rent seeking. We don't pay for the fuel. Wind and solar are free. And so there is very little space for this when we're going for a low-cost activity. I think if you're wanting to know where the big challenge coming up is all around the grid, anybody with electrical engineering experience, anything in that space, the grid is going to become highly complex. One just has to read up on what is happening in Australia, how complex the grid connections are getting. The grid needs to become what the internet is to us today. It needs to be a diverse network where we can connect anywhere and take off anywhere. And that's just not the case with the historical grid that has been built today. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that answer. As you've pointed out, that there are many jobs that are going to be available, and not just for startup companies, but for those that are skilled and semi-skilled in the energy sector already. Jonathan, this brings me to the question of around looking at existing wind farms. You have already given us an example of an existing wind farm, but our audience would also like to know about the potential of offshore wind locations and developments, and have any been identified? I know that we have in South Africa Wind Atlas, but besides that, how do we identify these potential offshore locations?
Thank you, Nicolette. With regards to offshore, currently the Department of Energy in South Africa haven't actually looked at any offshore wind farms. I think that's mainly based on the fact that we do have a lot of land available for wind farm development with escarpments, with plenty of wind resource. So that would be one aspect. And I think another thing which would be the technical aspects of actually installing offshore wind farms, which get very expensive when you're having to build large grid connections to connect wind farms. So I think generally with African wind farm development, I see more of it going onshore rather than offshore, just because we have the space and we want the cheapest power. And if we have that, I don't think we would look to offshore developments in the future.
All right, thank you so much. Andrea, do you want to perhaps add to that response in terms of offshore locations that are happening globally?
Yes, of course. And maybe just, to spend a few words. I mean, of course, South Africa is in the radar as a potential offshore for offshore wind. But as also Jonathan said, I do believe as well that onshore wind is the first priority. If we look globally, the offshore wind industry is literally booming, and Asia is for sure one of the predominant markets for offshore wind, and also US is popping up as a very promising reality for offshore wind. So I definitely see the offshore wind industry growing all around the world, and of course we'll have a future in Africa as well. But I do believe that the most important point, as also Gemma said, is actually to realize that we need to find means to generate the cheapest electricity, the electricity in the cheapest way. So I do believe that offshore is not still yet for emerging markets.
Thank you so much for that response. Andrea, keeping with you, let's talk a bit about the technical challenges. What are your views around wind turbine development trends for both offshore and onshore projects and the technical challenges around that?
Yes, thanks for the question. It's actually very, very interesting. And I'll try to be brief and give sort of global overview, trying to go about offshore and onshore. Well, starting from offshore, what we definitely saw in the last 10 years is the development of, let's say, wind turbine machine with higher towers and larger rotors. Just to give you maybe some data as well, in 2018, the first 10 megawatt machine was introduced in the market for offshore wind application, and it was introduced by MHI Vestas. And recently, GE announced the development of a 12 megawatt wind machine that will be commercialized by 2021. And just to give you an idea, I mean, we'll have, let's say, a 220 meter rotor. I mean, we are speaking about very gigantic machines. And specifically for onshore, what I think is also relevant is start to see the development of wind turbine machines that are optimized for low and medium wind speed conditions, which means that actually a lot of, let's say, sites that were considered not feasible maybe 5 or 10 years ago, now they are becoming actually feasible due to the realization of new machines that are optimized for low and medium wind speed conditions. Then speaking also about challenges in general for offshore and onshore, I would say that maybe what is in the mind of every regulator and every transmission system operator and every government is to try to, let's say, generate electricity from viable renewable sources like wind and solar 24/7. So I think that one of the most challenging things is how to develop and how to enhance the rollout of energy storage system in order to be able to store the electricity from wind turbine and from PV solar farms when actually there is not an high demand of electricity, and we use this electricity stored when there is an high demand.
Oh, thanks so much, Andrea. I've just received the survey results, and having a look at it, it actually looks quite close. The question was, is the not in my backyard opposition a concern for wind development? And the majority of the audience voted yes, with 59.26%. I'd like to ask you, Peter, to start off with a brief discussion around why you think the majority of people think that this is definitely a concern.
Yeah, thank you. My answer to the question is yes and no. I think we've seen development costs go up between $500,000 and $1 million per wind farm due to the effect. I think there will always be people against progress, and I wouldn't want to be in the Department of Environmental Affairs, and I know its name's changed in South Africa, because they truly are comparing economic benefits to rural communities with the environmental sustainability issues of fauna and flora. And I think it's very unfair almost to ask them to make that decision, but somebody's got to make that decision. I think it's sad in Africa where we get hobby farmers really slowing down rural development. So that makes me particularly sad. And as I've said, I think the cost of getting the development away and hence the cost of the end electricity has really rocketed due to the NIMBY effect. But globally, we're seeing the groundswell, and I think we're going to win out in the long term. The prediction is 4 times growth of the industry over the next 21 years. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. And Jonathan, what are your thoughts around the response to the survey question?
I think we could probably approach it from 2 aspects. And when I say aspects, maybe kind of different segments. The one is utility size for wind farms, and another is distributed embedded generation. And from a utility side, generally the wind farms are getting further remote, but there are still big issues when it comes to, like Peter said, hobby farmers or people living in the area who might consider their particular environment very unique in terms of the national space, which is really, really difficult because they get the public can get very opinionated with regards to these aspects and might prevent development from occurring. With regards to embedded generation, you're always going to be fighting a battle between, you want to generate power, but you want to consume power. And, for you to have the cheapest, where you consume, it needs to be closer to you, which means that for embedded generation, you want wind turbines to really be closer to towns or cities so that you can really decrease the costs of bringing that power to you in terms of losses. So, not in my backyard. Well, it kind of needs to be in your backyard because that's the cheapest way for you to get the cheapest electricity. So I think that is going to become an issue, and what's important there is just the regulations or restrictions around development. So, if you're developing certain distances away from towns or certain environmental restrictions, visual restrictions, noise restrictions, as if you are abiding to those, which should be set, then your development, should proceed. So, the public always have their opinion, but you've got to find that balance.
That's very well said. Thank you, Jonathan. Andrea, from an international perspective, what are your thoughts around the response to the survey question?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, also considering my personal point of view, I would definitely say yes and no, as also Peter highlighted at the beginning, because first of all, I would like to highlight that it's a very sensitive topic. Not in my backyard is actually one of the hot topics that is also discussed in many different countries, including Denmark, for instance, even if, we have this large penetration of wind energy. And I think what is the key around this topic is actually that as regulators or perhaps as utilities and also as project developers, we should be able to communicate better to citizens actually what is the value of wind energy for them. So perhaps maybe I would like just to share my thought about what could be some potential instruments or solutions looking ahead regarding this topic. And as I said in the beginning, I believe that probably we need to create new support schemes or planning frameworks, which are also based on a larger citizen engagement level. And also in terms of thinking about, for instance, local authorities, I think that we should be, and when I say we, I refer to perhaps government agency and regulators, we should be able to help them better to take in consideration what could be the main concern of communities in major renewable energy projects, including wind. And probably one of the last things that I would like maybe to mention as a potential solution regarding how to tackle this issue of not in my backyard is actually a need of including a more large local government level in land management, and also more local economic benefits from renewable energy projects. That I believe that could be some inspiration or some instrument that we should work on in terms of trying to make wind energy more, let's say, valuable for citizens.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that insight from a global perspective. We've been getting in some fantastic questions from the audience, and we will try to get through as many as possible in the next few minutes. To start off, another question for you, Peter, and this is looking at whether you find that we have sufficient skills, especially installation and maintenance operations support to support the growth of the industry?
I think the simple answer is no, but there's a very important caveat, and that is we need policy certainty. When I was in my 20s, not so long ago, I would never have used that term. I didn't even understand it. And I think now I use that term a couple of times a day. We just don't have policy certainty anywhere on the continent. And to be honest, neither do we have policy certainty in Australia nor the US. Those are the markets we operate across. And without that policy certainty, you end up having factories like the Tower factory in Port Elizabeth that shuts down because we don't have this policy certainty. So the skills are not there. The skills could be there. The cost of a typical wind farm in South Africa is somewhere between 2 and 3 billion rand, so $150 million for a 100 megawatt facility. So the money is there in these projects to train and skill people, but we don't have the policy certainty to drive that forward. And to my point earlier, these skills are not only electrical engineers or construction engineers. There's a vast array of skills that we need across the wind energy development chain that need to be developed. Thank you.
Just to jump in there, Peter, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, policy certainty is definitely one of the big factors considering our industry. I know a lot of wind turbines manufacturers are looking at the South African market and have been very successful in the market, and there's still new ones still looking at that, looking at entering the market. But these particular wind turbine manufacturers I'm thinking of too, they've been around for the last 4 to 5 years with absolutely no project going ahead just with regards to running procurement programs in South Africa. So, it has stalled, and that's a big problem because people are running businesses, even the transport sector, moving components back and forth, producing those components like the tower manufacturing in PE. It's a big knock for the industry. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you in getting political certainty on how much do we need and how much will be procured annually and how often. Will it be annually or will it be every second year or every third year? We need to have a longer term view on the capacity that will be procured and eventually built.
Thank you so much, both. Andrea, I have a question specifically for Denmark that will go to you. And they're looking at Denmark being top in terms of the cost in the European Union, even though they say wind is touted as cheap. So is this because of the wind penetration in Denmark?
Yeah, yes and no, in a way that, to answer very shortly the question, Denmark was one of the pioneers in terms of developing wind energy. We started back then in the 70s with onshore wind. We were the first country in the world to develop a multi-megawatt machine back in 1979. And we were, at the same time, in 1991, the first country to build and set up an offshore wind farm. So I think that the secret in terms of getting so cheap prices, both onshore and offshore, both for onshore and offshore wind, is a sort of very long and extended policy certainty around wind. And that is, I think, is one of the key message for every country that wants to go in this direction. If there is a strong political commitment and a clear visibility of what the pipeline of project is going to look like, I believe that price will go down. Because if you also see not only the example of Denmark, but looking into, for instance, Germany or also Mexico or Netherlands, I mean, giving a stability in the political framework around the support of wind energy and giving a sort of visibility in the project pipeline, I believe that make wind energy more accessible or cheaper in a lot of different and for a lot of different countries.
I just want to add to what Andrea is saying there. I had a very interesting conversation with an African energy minister earlier in this year, and she was saying, I can't procure renewable energy this year because next year it's going to be cheaper and everybody will give me hassles because I procured this expensive energy. And I think that's the wrong attitude to take for governments of Africa. The attitude needs to be, as long as my cost of electricity is moving downwards, then I'm doing the right job. Not that electricity next year will be cheaper than this year, so I mustn't procure now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have a few more questions, but we are also running out of time. So I'd just like to pose one last question before we start our closing statements. And so I'd like for each person to respond to this question, which is looking at the increase of renewable energy capacity. How do African countries, for instance, like Kenya and others, are going to cope with the energy integration from intermittent sources of energy? Because I think this is a key concern for the majority of people. So what measures is the energy sector taking to aid renewable energy integration? Peter, if you can respond first.
Yeah, look, I do hear the concern, and when you start getting above 75%, it starts being a challenge. I think we've seen storage come down significantly. WindLab has just connected to the grid a project in northern Queensland that is wind, solar, and battery, all behind the meter, and that has an over 70% capacity factor. We also have Lake Turkana running for 3 months this year, north of 90% capacity factor. Eskom coal fleet only runs at 69%. So we've got to be careful. I think anywhere up to 30-40%, we truly do not have challenges. In Africa, we really have electricity economies that don't have enough electrons. This isn't a matter of retiring old and bringing in new outside of South Africa. This is really about growing as quickly as we can. I often travel to Tanzania in a morning you can have 5 blackouts because of the lack of electrons available. So the intermittency, anywhere up to 50%, should really be put in the back of our minds, and we should grow the capacity. Post then, I really believe that battery storage, and particularly battery storage linked into where the demand centers are, is going to drive that. And then the combination of wind and solar, we really can get energy plants that are delivering 70, 80% capacity factor from renewable energy. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter. So I'd like to now ask Jonathan, in terms of how do we measure energy, the energy sector taking on renewable energy integration? What is your response to that?
Sure. I think that's a good question, and I think it's one of those where every country is going to be different, and I think probably the first step every country should take is understanding what resources they have available to them, and then designing a system or a program, or depending on how they want to get that energy onto their grid, is saying how much wind is available to you, how much solar is available to you, and then start from that point and then design your grids according to that. One thing that I often see is also overlooked is renewables also play a strong part in creating what is known as enabling services or grid enabling services, which typically involves voltage and frequency stability in some cases for your advanced technologies, which is often overlooked. So if you are having distributed wind farms or solar farms across your grid, there's certain technical ability that those distributed generation can have in strengthening your power if it's procured correctly from a technical point of view. So I think with that aspect as well, if you ensure that your procurement programs really are attracting some advanced technical features, they can add a lot of grid stability in terms of providing, for example, reactive power.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Andrea, what is your response to how do we cope with the energy integration of renewable energies?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and at the same time, I think there are a lot of low-hanging solutions, let's say, out there, and also for African countries. And as I said before in my opening, I do believe that for sure moving towards a sort of more oriented cross-border electricity market could be one of the solutions for the short and the long term for Africa for integrate more renewable energy. And as I also said, there are instruments already in place, like the Southern African Power Pool and the Eastern African Power Pool. What I think we need is to try to understand how to use them in a more dynamic way, and how actually try to take benefit from using this power tool. Is not a case that Denmark and a lot of other countries in Europe are able to integrate such a large volume of renewable energy. And one of the main reasons is because we are interconnected. First, we were interconnected as a Nordic energy market in the Scandinavia region, and now we are unifying the European electricity market, because we do believe that this is the way forward. Looking as well for low-hanging fruit solution, I believe that one of the things that should be done is to try to upgrade national control rooms in a lot of different countries in Africa, because we need a sort of visibility of the distribution level where a lot of these renewable energy plants are installed. Because if we make them viable and visible in a national control center, then we are able in somehow to know what is their behavior and how to deal with them and how to integrate them. And then one of the last things is exactly the issue around the flexibilization of the thermal power fleet. This is one of the issues that exactly could be maybe extremely relevant for South Africa. And I do believe that this is one of the key secrets for integrating more renewable energy. So trying to move and trying to have a sort of mind shift from base load to flexible generation for coal-fired thermal power plants.
Right, thank you so much, everyone. We still have questions coming in, but unfortunately we are running out of time. And so what I do ask is that you just keep your questions coming in, and we will see if we can get them answered offline and a response sent to you after the webinar. I'd like to now ask each of our guest speakers to give a final thought on the wind energy market to our listeners. Peter, you're up.
Thank you. I do want to reiterate the message around policy certainty, but drag it more into the development part of it, the early stage pre-construction area. We see very little, if none, of government understanding of this area. I believe this market is a R1 billion industry in South Africa alone. And countries like Kenya, like Tanzania, and others, of course, could really generate a lot of revenue, skill generation in this early stage renewable energy development market if government was just to give some kind of clear focus and policy direction in those areas. You could really grow a great industry in East Africa, in West Africa, around that. So anybody from the policy side that are listening, please take note and feel free to get hold of me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your closing thought, Peter. And Jonathan, from your perspective, what is the final thing you'd like to leave with our audience?
I think from my side, with regards to the question that came up with NIMBY comments coming up for wind energy developments, I think in the future, I think we should consider certain landscapes to include wind energy. I think if you are in a city which is particularly windy, for you to be getting the cheapest power, I think when you look out of your city and you look on the horizon, you should, if you want to be sustainable, you should be seeing a wind turbine or a few. I think that's where the future is headed, and I think that should become a norm for us, where we should be able to look at it. I know Europe, Andrea, you could account for this. In Europe, depending on where you are, you can see wind turbines on the horizon if you're in a town or in a city. Yes, they are placed in certain places to be far away and consider certain restrictions, but that should be the case. And especially here in Africa, I think there should be no reason why wind turbine development shouldn't happen within eyesight of CBDs or cities.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And lastly, Andrea, what is your final thought to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I would like maybe to highlight once again that as shown worldwide, wind energy is definitely one of the cheapest energy sources. So I think that we need to be able to use this energy in a more, let's say, democratic way, which means that I do believe that we have solutions out there to be able to integrate more wind in the system. And wind energy as well as solar energy can do a lot for providing cheap electricity to citizens, can do a lot for creating jobs, can do a lot for diversify our electricity mix. So I think that maybe wrapping up, also coming from a government agency, I do believe that we do need policy certainty around wind, because policy certainty is the key enabler for being able to develop a wind industry in a country. And we shouldn't be afraid to move towards wind energy, because as Denmark and Europe and US and Asia, South Africa, Kenya and Morocco, many different countries have shown, wind energy can represent the main backbone of our electricity system.
Thank you so much, Andrea. We've come to the end of our webinar, and I'd like to just remind everybody that the presentations and the broadcast will be available on our website as from tomorrow. My thanks to our guest speakers for taking their time to participate and for sharing their knowledge, and to you, our listeners, for tuning in today for this live broadcast brought to you by ESI Africa and the Windaba 2019 conference taking place on the 8th and 9th of October in Cape Town, where I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for listening.